The Last Dance series finale premiered on ESPN on Sunday night. If you don't know what The Last Dance is about, it's a documentary series about Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls in the 90s. It shows Jordan as an athlete in the early 80s to the late 90s, and then a behind-the-scenes look at the Bulls dynasty, one of the most iconic and dominant dynasties in the history of sports. I know what you're going to say. Oh, Dave, you're just going to talk about Jordan versus LeBron because, you're a big Cavs guy and you're from Akron and you love LeBron and blah, blah, blah. You're not even talking about the documentary series. No, Jordan versus LeBron would be a different video. I'm just going to talk about the documentary series, even though LeBron is better than Michael Jordan, but we're going to talk about the documentary series. That'd be a whole different video. So let's get into it right now. So what do I think about The Last Dance? I think The Last Dance is one of the best sports documentaries ever made. And yes, a big reason for that is the content. It's very popular, it's iconic, it's funny, it's interesting, it's all that. But the other reason why I think this documentary series is great is because of how they present that really cool content. So the main focus of the series is The Last Dance, the 97-98 season. The last season the Bulls are together. And they have behind the scenes footage of it. They documented that whole season, and that's awesome. I thought that was really cool to see. But what I mean by how the documentary presents in a cool way is that they show that 97 season. That's like the main focus. But when they show things like Jordan's rookie season or Scottie getting drafted or anything like that, they'll cut back to it, and then they'll cut back to the 97 season. They jump timelines. Now, I know a lot of people complained about that, but I thought that was one of the reasons why this documentary is so great. The reason why I thought it was so great is because when they cut back to these things, they sort of build upon itself. So where when we get to the finale, it feels like everything is coming together at once and the payoff is really there, which I don't think that payoff would have been nearly as good. But they present this content in the right order it was supposed to be presented in, from like the start of the early 80s and we just go to the late 90s. If they presented it like that, I don't think this documentary would have been nearly as interesting. So I gotta give the creators props for able to edit and present this stuff in a very interesting way by jumping these timelines. I thought that was one of the best parts about this documentary series. Now, I'm a huge basketball fan. I'm a huge sports fan. So most of the stuff in this documentary, I know already. I've seen it already. I get it. But the thing that really fascinated me was seeing the behind the scenes of it. Like, unfortunately, the shot against the Cavs, like, we got a behind-the-scenes look at that and players' reactions to that. It happens with all the iconic moments throughout the 90s, so I thought that was really cool. So I think any sort of sports fan will love this documentary for that. One of my favorite aspects of this series is the trash talking. It was so fucking funny to hear stories about Michael Jordan trash talking. It was so funny. And it was so funny to hear players' reactions to it from their point of view, being like, yeah, he said that. He called me a hoe, he called me a dipshit, like, yeah, he said that. It was so funny to see all that. And I knew most of Michael Jordan's trash talking stories, like specifically the Reggie Miller one, but there was some I never even heard about, and that was a nice surprise. It was so funny. It was honestly comical at some points. I thought the iPad thing they did was very smart, where basically they would ask a player or some iconic sports figure, like, yeah, what do you think about this? And they would be like, well, I think if this would have happened, the series would have went a different way or something like that. Then they would give Jordan an iPad with the video of that sports figure talking about something that happened in a series or something against Michael, and we would get Michael's live reaction to whatever that player was saying, and it was always so funny. It always turned into a meme. This is one of the most memeable documentaries ever. It's up there with Tiger King. Like I said before, I knew about most of the stuff in this documentary, but the stuff I didn't know about really fascinated me, specifically with Dennis Rodman, Scottie Pippen, and Steve Kerr. That stuff I found the most interesting part about the documentary. Yes, Michael Jordan is very interesting. He's one of the most iconic sports figures of all time, and all that is so fun to watch, and it is entertaining. But I will say the stories about Scottie and Dennis and Steve Kerr I found very interesting. And it's stuff I never even heard of, so I was really surprised by that. I'm glad they showed that. I'm also surprised they talked about some issues that I feel like Michael Jordan doesn't like talking about. Like, they talk about his gambling problem. They talk about how people thought he pushed off on Game 6 in the finals. They talk about how he was a bad teammate. And they talk about it. I was surprised by that. Now, granted, they kind of just like gloss over it, and they talk about just to bury it, be like, nope, that didn't happen, or you're wrong about that, or like with the teammate thing, being like, oh, it was just tough love. But I had to give him props for at least bringing it up and at least talking about it. I just found that very surprising. I'm glad they did that. And like I said, just how it was presented and edited and stuff, I thought the payoff at the end was really good. I thought the finale was really well done. I just kind of wish they showed more of like what happened after 98. Like, at the end of every true story movie or documentary, they have like, the subtitle stuff about what happened to them next, and they tell you. They kind of do it here, but they don't go into too much detail, and I get what they're trying to do. I don't know. I wanted to hear more about what happened afterwards. I know some of it, but I feel like that's a part of the NBA that a lot of people don't really talk about, is what happened with the players on the 98 Bulls team, what they did afterwards. They don't talk about it at all here, and I thought that'd be something that would be kind of interesting to talk about. But I get what they were doing at the end. I understand. In the end, though, The Last Dance is one of the best sports documentaries ever made. The reason I think that is because obviously the material is very, very popular and it's very interesting. Michael Jordan is one of the most iconic sports figures of all time, and the 90s Bulls dynasty is one of the most iconic dynasties of all time as well. But the real reason I feel like this documentary really thrived is the way they presented their content and made it seem like a very cohesive story with very good payoff at the end. It was funny, it was interesting, they talked about issues I didn't think they would talk about. You're obviously going to love this documentary series if you're a Chicago Bulls fan. If you're just a fan of sports and you know about Michael Jordan, all the iconic moments, you're going to find it interesting as well because you get a behind the scenes look at all of it. And if you're a sports fan and you don't know much about Michael Jordan and the 90s Bulls, I think you're really going to be fascinated by everything that's presented here. This isn't my favorite sports documentary of all time. I would say OJ Made in America is probably my favorite sports documentary of all time. That's probably my favorite documentary of all time. But granted, that had a lot more drama than this. So, yeah. So, The Last Dance. Let me know what you guys thought of it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Click here to see more of Dave's Takes.